This is the story of why commercial airplanes hit an invisible wall at around 600 miles per hour. The answer isn't what most people think. It's not the sound barrier itself, but something far more practical that keeps modern jets locked at speeds our grandparents would recognize. Board a flight today, and you're moving at roughly the same speed as passengers did in 1958, when the Boeing 707 inaugurated the jet age cruising at Mach 0.83. Our most advanced airliners, the Boeing 787 and Airbus A350, cruise at Mach 0.85, which means that in nearly 70 years of aviation progress, we've gained just 0.02 of a Mach number. Some modern jets actually fly slightly slower than the original 707, and this isn't an accident or a failure of engineering, but a deliberate choice driven by physics and economics that creates what pilots and engineers call the wall. Understanding this wall starts with a common misconception about the sound barrier being a fixed number, something like 760 miles per hour. Sound doesn't travel at a constant speed though, because at sea level on a 15 degrees Celsius day, it moves at 761 miles per hour, but at 35,000 feet where airliners cruise and the temperature drops to about -54 degrees Celsius, sound slows to just 660 miles per hour. Temperature is the only thing that matters for an ideal gas like air, which means as you climb through the troposphere and it gets colder, the speed of sound drops. Above about 36,000 feet in the stratosphere, temperatures stabilize and actually start rising again due to the ozone layer, so the speed of sound increases. Pilots don't think in miles per hour, they think in Mach numbers, which measure speed relative to the local speed of sound. A jet flying at Mach 0.85 at 35,000 feet is traveling at about 561 miles per hour true airspeed, but the same Mach number at a different altitude would give you a completely different speed in miles per hour. Here's where it gets interesting. Even when an airplane is flying at Mach 0.80, well below the speed of sound, the air flowing over the curved upper surface of the wing accelerates because it has to travel farther over the top than the bottom. Parts of the wing can experience supersonic airflow faster than Mach 1.0, even at Mach 0.80. And the aircraft speed at which this first happens is called the critical Mach number. Once that local airflow goes supersonic, a shock wave forms on the wing. Picture a razor-thin boundary where pressure, density and temperature spike violently and the air abruptly slows down, with all that energy dissipating as a sharp increase in drag, what engineers call wave drag. The drag divergence Mach number is the speed at which this drag begins increasing rapidly, and this is the real wall that commercial aviation hits. Below this point, drag increases roughly with the square of your speed in a predictable, manageable relationship. But in the transonic regime between Mach 0.8 and Mach 1.2, wave drag adds an exponential penalty on top, and the drag coefficient can rise to more than 10 times its low-speed value. Early aerodynamic theory actually predicted infinite drag at exactly Mach 1.0, which is where the myth of an unbreakable sound barrier came from. The sound barrier isn't unbreakable, and on October 14, 1947, US Air Force Captain Chuck Yeager proved that in spectacular fashion. He was 24 years old, a World War II ace with 13 victories, and he'd broken 2 ribs in a horseback riding accident just 2 nights earlier. His aircraft was the Bell X-1, nicknamed Glamorous Glennis after his wife, and at just after sunrise, a Boeing B-29 carried the X-1 to altitude over Rogers Dry Lake in the Mojave Desert. Yeager dropped free, ignited the rocket engine, and punched through to Mach 1.06, about 700 miles per hour, at 43,000 feet. The Air Force kept the flight secret and didn't announce it until June 10, 1948, 8 months later. Yeager received the Mackay Trophy, the Collier Trophy, and eventually a Congressional Silver Medal presented by President Ford in 1976, but his achievement was accomplished in a rocket plane with 4 minutes of fuel. Whether practical commercial flight beyond the sound barrier was even possible remained an open question. Engineers answered that question in two stages. Swept wings, introduced by German researchers during World War II and refined by Boeing and others, reduce the effective airflow component over the wing and raise the critical Mach number. NASA engineer Richard Whitcomb developed the supercritical airfoil, which flattens the wing's upper surface and curves the lower surface to delay shock formation, and his area rule, which gave aircraft like the F-102 their distinctive wasp waist fuselage, further reduced transonic wave drag. These innovations allowed the Boeing 707 to cruise at Mach 0.83 when it entered service in 1958. Pan Am placed an order in 1955 for 45 jets, 20 Boeing 707s and 25 Douglas DC-8s, for $269 million, a staggering sum that forced every major airline to follow suit. The first commercial 707 flight departed New York for Paris on October 26, 1958, carrying 111 passengers and a crew of 11 on an 8.5-hour journey with a fuel stop in Gander, Newfoundland. That flight established the template for modern air travel: Mach 0.83, high subsonic speed, no shock waves, manageable fuel consumption, and that's roughly where we've stayed. Modern commercial aircraft cruise between Mach 0.78 and Mach 0.86, about 520 to 660 miles per hour at typical cruise altitudes, with the Boeing 747-8, one of the fastest commercial jets still in service, cruising at Mach 0.855 or just 659 miles per hour. The most popular narrow-body jets, the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320 families, cruise at Mach 0.78 to 0.79, around 520 miles per hour. Airlines deliberately chose these numbers to stay just below each aircraft's drag divergence point. The economics are brutal. Flying just Mach 0.01 faster, 1/100th of the speed of sound, increases fuel burn by 3 to 5% without a proportional time saving, and on a 12-hour flight, the difference between Mach 0.78 and Mach 0.86 amounts to about 45 to 50 minutes, while that extra fuel cost can completely eliminate the flight's profitability. Airlines operate on razor-thin margins of just 2 to 4% net profit, so speed got traded for fuel economy and passengers chose cheap seats over fast arrivals. The Boeing 787, introduced in 2009, actually cruises slightly slower than the original 707 from 1957. But there was one spectacular exception: Concorde. Britain and France formalized a joint program by treaty in November 1962, and Concorde first flew on March 2, 1969, entering commercial service on January 21, 1976, with British Airways flying London to Bahrain and Air France flying Paris to Rio de Janeiro. 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus 593 turbojet engines with afterburners, the only commercial airliner ever to use afterburners, pushed it to Mach 2.02, about 1,350 miles per hour at 60,000 feet. Testing showed the aircraft could reach Mach 2.23, but sustained flight was limited to Mach 2.02 because the aluminum airframe couldn't withstand the heat above that speed. At Mach 2, the nose reached 127 degrees Celsius and the fuselage stretched 12 inches from thermal expansion. Concorde carried about 100 passengers in a 4-abreast cabin and could cross the Atlantic in under 3.5 hours. February 7, 1996, saw the fastest crossing ever recorded when British Airways flight GBOAD flew from New York JFK to London Heathrow in 2 hours, 52 minutes and 59 seconds, aided by a 175-mile-per-hour tailwind. Round-trip tickets cost about $12,000 in 2003, roughly $21,000 in today's money. But Concorde was an economic disaster. The development program was estimated at £70 million in 1962, but final costs reached between £1.5 and £2.1 billion in 1976 money, equivalent to roughly £12 to £16 billion today. 20 aircraft were built when the original forecast had been 350, and only British Airways and Air France bought them, 7 each. No other airline ever operated Concorde. Fuel was the problem. Concorde burned about 20,500 kilograms of fuel per hour at cruise. roughly 4 times what a Boeing 747 consumed on the same route, and used 2 tons of fuel just taxiing. Overall, fuel efficiency was about 17 passenger miles per gallon, compared to 50 to 80 for typical subsonic airliners, and British Airways reportedly spent about £1 billion per year operating its Concorde fleet by the early 2000s. The aircraft cut transatlantic travel time by 55%, but consumed 4 to 5 times more fuel per passenger mile than a subsonic widebody. Physics and economics were in direct conflict, and economics was winning. July 25, 2000 brought disaster when Air France Flight 4590 crashed on takeoff from Paris, killing all 109 people on board and 4 on the ground after a tire burst from runway debris ruptured a fuel tank. The fleet was grounded until November 2001, and then post-9/11 premium travel collapsed while maintenance costs kept rising. Airbus, which had inherited responsibility for the aircraft, announced it would discontinue support, so British Airways and Air France announced retirement on April 10, 2003. Air France's last commercial flight was May 30, 2003. British Airways' final commercial Concorde flight was October 24, 2003, and the last flight of any kind was November 26, 2003. Commercial aviation returned to the 600-mile-per-hour ceiling after Concorde, but the dream of supersonic travel didn't die. It just went dormant. 2 programs have emerged in recent years to challenge that ceiling. Boom! Supersonic's Overture, a planned 64 to 80 passenger airliner designed to cruise at Mach 1.7, about 1,100 miles per hour, is the first. Blake Scholl founded the company in 2014, and it has raised over $600 million and secured commitments for about 130 aircraft from American Airlines, United Airlines, and Japan Airlines. On January 28, 2025, Boom's XB-1 demonstrator became the first independently developed civil aircraft to fly supersonic since Concorde retired, reaching Mach 1.122 at 35,290 feet in the first civil supersonic flight over the continental United States. Overture promises several advances over Concorde: 4 engines with no afterburners, 100% sustainable aviation fuel capability, and a boomless cruise mode that could allow up to Mach 1.3 over land by keeping the shockwave from reaching the ground. Target ticket price is around $5,000 round trip for New York to London, less than half what Concorde charged. But December 9, 2025 brought a strategic pivot when the company announced it would first develop a 42-megawatt natural gas turbine for AI data centers to fund engine development, which CEO Blake Scholl said could cost a few $1 billion. Overture faces what Scholl called a short-term delay, and industry observers note that Concorde had over 100 options from major airlines but delivered only 14 commercial aircraft. NASA's X-59 is the second program, built by Lockheed Martin under a $247.5 million contract and making its first flight on October 28, 2025. The goal isn't to carry passengers, but to prove that supersonic flight can be quiet, because traditional supersonic aircraft produce a sonic boom of about 105 perceived noise decibels, while the X-59 is designed to produce just 75 decibels, a soft thump instead of a boom. NASA will fly it over selected communities and survey reactions, with the data going to the FAA and the International Civil Aviation Organization to help write new rules. This matters because on April 27, 1973, the FAA put into effect Federal Aviation Regulation Part 91.817, which banned all civil aircraft from exceeding Mach 1 over the United States, even if no boom reached the ground. Concorde got restricted to overwater routes, which effectively killed the American supersonic transport program. But June 6, 2025 changed everything when President Trump signed an executive order titled Leading the World in Supersonic Flight, directing the FAA to repeal the 52-year-old ban for aircraft that don't produce an audible sonic boom on the ground. The FAA must issue a notice of proposed rulemaking within 18 months. So where does this leave us? The 600-mile-per-hour wall isn't really a wall at all, but an economic choice, because we have the technology to fly faster, and Concorde proved that 50 years ago. Whether passengers will pay enough extra to cover the exponentially higher fuel costs has always been the question, and for 5 decades the answer has been no. A businessman willing to pay for speed can't justify 4 times the fuel consumption for a 55% time saving when a subsonic business class seat gets him there just a few hours later at a quarter of the environmental and economic cost. But technology changes economics. If Boeing, Supersonic or others can build a supersonic airliner that burns only twice the fuel of a subsonic jet instead of 4 times, and if they can eliminate the sonic boom to open up overland routes, the math might finally work. The X-59 might prove that supersonic flight doesn't have to sound like thunder. Regulatory changes might allow New York to Los Angeles in 2.5 hours instead of 6, and 70 years after the Boeing 707 established the template, we might finally move past 600 miles per hour. When you board your next flight, you'll cruise at Mach 0.85, about 560 miles per hour, just below the point where physics and economics collide. That invisible wall has held for nearly 7 decades, not because we can't fly faster, but because flying faster costs too much. The sound barrier was broken in 1947. The economic barrier remains.